Now let's go ahead and proceed with our review for The Avengers. This 1998 film, directed by Jeremiah S. Chechik, is based on...
Wait, sorry. No, this is the wrong movie. No, we're not doing this movie.
I'm sorry, what?
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's a little bit of a mix-up.
So we're not doing The Avengers?
Yeah, no, not that movie.
The 1998 spy comedy film based on the British television show by the same name?
No, unfortunately, we're not doing
With
that.
Ralph Fiennes, Uma Thurman, and Sir Sean Connery?
I apologize. I sincerely apologize. This is a completely different movie.
What the hell other Avengers are there? That was unfortunate. Greetings everybody, welcome to another episode of Eugene Reviews, and finally, we have reached the final part of Phase 1 for the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And no, we're not going to talk about the 1998 film, The Avengers. We're here to talk about the 2012 superhero film known as Marvel's The Avengers. Marvel's The Avengers marks the 6th feature-length film in this plethora of a catalog known as the Marvel Cinematic Universe. What was started off in 2008 as a grand experiment is now finally being executed and paid off in this 2012 film, highlighting 6 monumental superheroes that we've been introduced in the past 4 years. My quick history on this film, I actually saw this in 3D on a random weekday afternoon. This was right around the time of finals during my spring semester as a freshman in college. And all-nighters and studying and whatnot really kind of made me not in the greatest of moods to watch movies, but I still went to watch with a couple friends. And I'll be honest, I initially fell asleep the first time I watched it. 2 reasonings behind that. One, I was sleepy as hell. It was finals time and I had to study and I was up all night. And second, it was in 3D. That was the only showings we were able to see because all the other ones were sold out or they were late. So we had no choice. We had to watch it in 3D, and yeah, I kind of regret watching it in 3D. But despite all that, I was able to see it. I think I might have seen it a second time. I'm not sure. I think maybe my college might have shown it during freshman orientation. But that was a long time ago, so I don't really remember. But that's a quick history on my viewings of that film. Now let's go ahead and jump into all 3 acts for The Avengers. Act 1, Development. The Avengers, Take 1. Now, if you've seen my previous video reviews on other MCU films, you'll realize that this film, The Avengers, is the culmination of those previous film stories and their build-ups and their character developments all finally playing out in this particular story. If you recall, on my previous video reviews, I had mentioned that Merrill Lynch invested some hefty amount of money into Marvel and Marvel Studios to make these feature-length films. And this is the execution that everybody was anticipating for. This was the execution to see if the build-up was worth it. If this was a poker table, Kevin Feige and Marvel Studios went all in on this film. Now, Marvel's Avengers was directed by Joss Whedon. If you're familiar with other nerdy properties such as Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Firefly, you will know the name Joss Whedon. So it's only befitting he would be the director of this. Little do people know too that he was also responsible for rewriting the script. Incredible Hulk writer Zach Penn was actually the main writer for this film until they hired Joss Whedon, and Joss Whedon just said, "F this script, let's go back to square one." He nearly rewrote the entire script. And even though at the end it was credited to both Joss Whedon and Zach Penn for writing the film, it was essentially Joss Whedon who wrote this film. I want people to realize too, this was also during the transition of Marvel being acquired by Disney. Disney bought the rights, the distribution rights to Marvel, so now they would be responsible for distributing the films. This was going to be the final film that would involve a shared production and shared distribution rights amongst studios. I want y'all to do me a favor whenever you watch films from the MCU. Especially when you watch Iron Man, Incredible Hulk, Iron Man 2, Thor, and Captain America: The First Avenger. Look at the opening credits. Who's in those opening credits? Paramount Pictures, Universal Pictures. And then what follows after? Marvel Studios. And then you watch The Avengers, and what's in the opening credits? Marvel Studios is first, then Paramount is second. This was the slow transition into Marvel becoming the main distributor, becoming the main company they highlight first. This was the transition we were talking about in regards to Disney acquiring Marvel. And from there on out, it was just all going to be self-financed by Marvel and Disney. Development started as early as the mid-2000s, and we saw throughout all of the previous MCU films that it was leading up to this film. And then in 2010, in the famed Hall H of San Diego Comic-Con, we were introduced to the entire cast of the Avengers. And everything was up and running from there. And then finally, on April 11th, 2012, the movie made its world premiere. And another interesting tidbit, the shawarma scene, the post-credit scene that we saw at the end of the movie, that was actually shot the day after the premiere. Joss Whedon shot that entire sequence and included that at the end of the film just before it premiered to the entire worldwide audience on May 4th, 2012. There's a lot of tidbits to notice from that. Everybody's in their costumes, all eating shawarma, and you can see Captain America covering up his face. That's because he had a prosthetic jaw to hide the beard that he had. Because if I'm not mistaken, he was shooting Snowpiercer at the time and he had the full-on beard and he didn't want to get rid of that. So they just told him, cover up his mouth. So key points in the production: the slow transition to Disney finally acquiring Marvel and their distribution rights, Joss Whedon nearly rewriting the entire script, but not getting the full credit for it, the build-up and culmination for the past 7 years, when Merrill Lynch invested in Marvel, to the first film, which was Iron Man, and now finally to this, and the introduction of the cast at the 2010 San Diego Comic-Con. So lots of build-up, lots of momentum, really all chips on the table, going all in. This is a big gamble. How did they go? Let's see in Act 2. Act 2, Execution, The Avengers, Take 1. Now, I feel like a film of this magnitude requires a little bit of a recap to see how these characters came to be in this film. Now, I could tell you my own words and ramble on of the history of this, but let me do something interesting and let me present it to you in the form of Funko Pops. Now, in 2008, we were introduced to, bam, this man, Tony Stark, aka Iron Man. Now, at the end of Iron Man, when he declared he was Iron Man and he had the press conference where he said, I am Iron Man, he was introduced to Nick Fury. Now, I don't have a Nick Fury Funko Pop, but for the sake of this showcase, I will be showing Nick Fury as his airness, Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan tells Tony Stark, I'm here to talk to you about the Avengers Initiative. Oh. Fast forward a couple months later, we are introduced to another superhero in Harlem by the name of the Incredible Hulk, aka Bruce Banner. He wreaks havoc and he happens to catch an eye of Tony Stark. Tony Stark informs Thunderbolt Ross, what if I told you we were putting the team together? Oh. 2 years pass and we are introduced once again to Iron Man, Tony Stark. Tony's having a midlife crisis, my life and everything like that. So Nick Fury checks in on him in the form of a S.H.I.E.L.D. agent known as Natasha Romanoff, aka Black Widow. So now we are introduced to these three. In 2011, we are introduced to the God of Thunder himself, the mighty Thor, as well as his brother Loki. Now, once again, I don't have a Loki Funko Pop, but for the sake of this video, Loki will be portrayed by Joey Tribbiani.
Why, God, why?
Thor becomes arrogant, he gets casted off to Earth, he finally discovers himself and says, hey, I am the king of Asgard, I know what I can become, I just can't wait to be king. And in the midst of finding out his brother is evil, he eliminates him from the equation. And somewhere looming in the distance, you see a little certain figure by the name of Clint Barton, aka Hawkeye. And this is your first glimpse of him, and by the looks of it, you're gonna see a lot more of him in the future. So we'll move on to that, but don't forget about Loki. And then in Captain America, the First Avenger, we are introduced to who? The Human Torch. No, dumbass, Captain America. Captain America, we see his perspective and his story in the 1940s, just before he gets under the ice and wakes up 70 years later in the final part of the movie. It was at this time he's alerted that the world needed saving, and thus begins the whole process of the Avengers. So now you're caught up. So with that recap out of the way, let's just go ahead and say what the overall impression of this film was. It's a really good story. It really ties everything together, and very, very well, might I add. Because this could have been easily lost in the mixture, or how the kids say, lost in the sauce. But thanks to the writing of Joss Whedon, and yes, just Joss Whedon, this film really does showcase the humane, vulnerable side of the Avengers. They don't just start off saying, hey, you can do this, I can do that, let's team up and do this. No, their egos are too big for even the helicarrier. So they bicker, they bitch and they moan and they complain and they argue with one another until they actually have a tipping point. The death of Coulson was the catalyst that really did bring the team truly together for the first time. And I really love that aspect. The one guy who wanted the team to be together so much, the one big fanboy, if you will, with his Captain America collection of trading cards, his relationship with Tony Stark, he was the one guy who wanted this team to work, and nobody else did. And in his untimely death, not really death, but during that time, It's what brought the team together. Thus, the Avengers were finally and truly assembled. And that way of storytelling, I really dug, and I credit Joss Whedon so much for bringing that story to life. What we also saw for the first time, I believe to be one of the first truly captivating and convincing villains in the entire MCU. And it wasn't a new villain or anything like that. It was actually a villain from a previous film. It was Loki. I had mentioned in the Thor review that Loki in that movie was slowly kind of coming out of his shell and becoming more than what he's supposed to be. In this film, he just expanded his wings and flew. In this film, Loki became Loki. He became Loki just from the way that he talked, the way that he walked, the smirk, the evil smirk that you see when he walks down the hallway of the helicarrier, knowing that he wanted to be captured. That way he can infiltrate and break the Avengers from within. Seeing that actually brought me back to the Dark Knight. He wanted to be locked up, that way he can infiltrate and break everything from the inside, just like what Loki did in the helicarrier. The film is splendid in regards to showing each of the characters justly. I feel like you can walk away from this film and see each character grow and really become a fan of these characters once it's all said and done. Now granted, you only see Hawkeye become good in the last third of the film, but even then, you do see really kind of his mentality and his allegiance when he does come to. And also, much to everyone's surprise, we see Mark Ruffalo taking over for Edward Norton, as Edward Norton was the Incredible Hulk in 2008. Now, the Incredible Hulk is being played by Mark Ruffalo. And I gotta say, Mark Ruffalo really took this role and made it his own. Now, even though Edward Norton was good for the Incredible Hulk, Mark Ruffalo was great for the Avengers. It's two different type of personalities, two different type of performances, but Mark Ruffalo made it work for the Avengers. That was the first time we can actually see and be invested in a relatable form of the Hulk. If you're a fan of the Hulk, you love the Hulk here. If you're a fan of Thor, you love Thor here. If you're a fan of Iron Man, you would have been a fan of Iron Man in this film. I just love how there's a balance and an even amount of showcase of character arcs and characterizations for each of the 6 Avengers. And seeing this film, it just absolutely was a nerd's delight. Captain America fighting alongside with Iron Man, seeing the Hulk fighting Thor, seeing Loki run rampant around New York City, and then finally that 360 shot of all the Avengers. Probably the most iconic shot of the decade in regards to movies. I will put that shot up against any shot in the 2010s. That shot holds up to this day. And just like all other films before it, there was another post-credit scene, and this one was the beginning of the epic post-credit scenes. We see a large, dark, mysterious, and eerie figure turning around and smirking as he begins his descent into Earth. Now I myself thought, oh, I know what that guy is. Who's that guy? Who's that guy? Who's that guy? And it turns out, after much research or just looking up Wikipedia, that villain was Thanos. And we will see Thanos all throughout the MCU. Little tidbits from here and there as the formidable foe and baddie of the entire MCU. That was our first glimpse of Thanos, but it would not be the last. So a whole lot to digest with this movie. The assembling, disassembling, and reassembling of the team. Mark Ruffalo's nice performance for this particular film. Loki really taking over this film as the big baddie, the tease of Thanos, and the evenness of showing all 6 of the Avengers. With that down, let's go ahead and hit Act 3. Act 3, Execution. The Avengers, take 1. Now, with this engorging amount of geekiness to give any nerd a hard-on, it was of course going to exceed expectations. And boy, did it. This is just some of the records that the Avengers broke during its initial theatrical run. At the time of its theatrical run, the Avengers broke the opening weekend for any film with $207.4 million. Opening week for any film at $270 million. Opening weekend adjusted for ticket pricing for $207.4 million. Opening IMAX gross at $15.3 million. 23 days to reach $500 million. 31 days to reach $550 million. The highest growing superhero film at that time, $623 million. Highest second weekend numbers for any film at $103.05 million. And at the time of this recording, the film stands at 8th place of highest grossing film of all time with $1.518 billion. The highest to reach is 3 during its time of release, just behind Titanic and Avatar. It didn't make the list for inflation, but who gives a damn about inflation? So it shattered not only expectations, but it shattered records. Remember I mentioned about the shawarma scene? It was reported in some states that the sales of shawarma skyrocketed after the release of the Avengers. I'll be one to admit too, right after the Avengers came out, I wanted some shawarma. And with all of this execution, it was the right amount of momentum and right amount of pacing it needed to kickstart phase 2 of the MCU. You thought the Avengers was big, just wait until what we got in store for the next couple of years. And even amongst the community of comic book lovers and comic book moviegoers, it's still up there as one of the greatest movies, comic book wise, of all time. You bring up any conversation for greatest comic book film ever, I'm sure the Avengers is on the list, whether it be top 5 or top 10 or what have you. To this day, a lot of people in the comic book community label this as one of the best. So shattered records and expectations. The momentum going into phase 2, skyrocketing shawarma sales, and the community really embracing this as one of the best, if not the best, comic book film of all time. So a lot to go with the response, a lot of positive response. Now let's go ahead, with all that being said, all 3 acts, let's go to the verdict. I'll be one to admit, whenever the Avengers was announced, I thought this could be something good, but not great. And I'm happy that I was wrong, because the Avengers really did take me aback and really shocked me in regards to how you develop characters, how you interact characters, and how you rebuild characters. And the way the Avengers played out really kind of opened my eyes to what this experiment of the MCU could be. Because let's be honest, around 2008 or even around 2012, no one really knew just how big the MCU was going to be now. But if it wasn't for Marvel's Iron Man, if it wasn't for those previous films really building up these characters, we wouldn't care so much about this Avengers film. And because of that, you relate to them a little more, you understand their motives, and you really understand the conflicting points when they butt heads. It's a well thought out experiment and a really good investment from Merrill Lynch to really put onto Marvel. I was surprised, I was entertained, I was emotional, and yeah, I was just taken aback by just how really well crafted this entire film was. A lot goes to Joss Whedon, a lot of credit goes to him for crafting this story, as well as the performances from all 6 Avengers. The chemistry that they displayed was top-notch and really did say to me that this experiment can and will work. Not to mention the action, not to mention the comedy too, because there's a good amount of comedy. There is so much to show and so much to dive in and so much to praise for this that I can't really cram it all into one video. So with that being said and kind of left to anyone's imagination, you can kind of guess where I'm going with this. I'm gonna give Avengers a 10 out of 10. Yes, a 10 out of 10. I'm not gonna lie, I almost forgot that I was gonna rank these films. So we've gone through 6. We've gone through 6 of these MCU films. Now that we have Avengers in the catalog and where to rank them, Iron Man has finally been dethroned. They had a lengthy run. I mean, 4 years was a nice run. But for me, the Avengers is now number 1 and Iron Man is number 2. Followed by Captain America the First Avenger, followed by Thor, followed by Iron Man 2, and followed by the Incredible Hulk. And with that, that closes the book on phase 1. And now we're gonna get into phase 2. With the start of phase 2 coming in the next 2 weeks, I will review Iron Man 3, and now it's gonna get a little more interesting. We know who these characters are, and now we're gonna see even deeper character arcs. We're gonna see even more villains and more, secondary characters that you're gonna see in other films. Now it's starting to pile up. Now we're gonna see really if it has legs to hold up just the massive amount of weight that Marvel itself can produce. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. That's my review and my take on the Avengers. What do you guys think of the movie? Did you enjoy it as much as I did? Did you think it was Did you think it was the worst movie ever made? I would like to know your opinions and your thoughts. Please leave them on the comment section below. Like, share, subscribe, get my word out. Let everybody know I'm out there on YouTube, I'm out there on the web. Be sure to follow my Instagram page at Eugene Reviews. You'll see all of the other previous reviews that I've done and then some. Continue to support the channel. Any type of support is welcomed and appreciated by all means. And thank you again. I hope you're enjoying this as much as I've been enjoying making these. And until then, I am signing off on another episode of Eugene Reviews. And that is a wrap. Yeah, I have a ton of these. I don't know if you know, but I collect Funko Pops. And low-key, I'm kind of bummed that I don't have a Nick Fury or a Loki Funko Pop. So if you want to help me out. Love, 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 love.